August 1944, Western France, the retreating shadow of the Wehrmacht. The air was heavy, not just with the late summer humidity, but with a tension that had been building for 4 years. The Allied invasion of Normandy, the spectacular storming of the beaches, had cracked the shell of Fortress Europe. Now the German war machine, no longer an invincible force, was grinding backward, leaving behind a trail of desperate actions and abandoned garrisons. This was the landscape of final, brutal acts. The village of Saint-Pierre, a forgotten knot of stone houses nestled in a clearing near the thick whispering forest, held no strategic value. It wasn't on the road to Paris. It housed no vital bridge or command center. Its population was a mere 48 souls. Old men, women and children, waiting for a liberation they were too weary to celebrate in advance. They knew the danger of this specific moment in history, the deadly space between occupation and freedom. Our story, however, does not begin with tanks or grand armies, but with a man and a shovel. Marcel Dubois was his name, a farmer. In the grand tapestry of the Second World War, he was a single, insignificant thread. His hands were calloused from the earth, his back strong from a lifetime of labor, not soldiering. Marcel had known war only as a thief. It stole his sons for forced labor, his crops for rationing, and his peace of mind for 4 long years. Yet beneath the plain facade of the agrarian life lay a granite determination, a refusal to be crushed. The irony of the situation was absolute. The inhabitants of Saint-Pierre had survived the Blitzkrieg and the long years of quiet tyranny, only to face their greatest threat in the final weeks of the war. What they didn't know, what they could not possibly have anticipated, was the storm gathering in the north, a storm of men, not metal, seeking a final devastating act of vengeance. A German unit, a company of the Waffen-SS over 300 strong, had been cut off. They were not elite tank crews or grizzled veterans of the Eastern Front, but a volatile mix of fanatical youth, hardened rear echelon guards, and disillusioned conscripts. Their mission was simple: bypass the main thrust of the Allied advance and rejoin the retreating lines. They were hungry, panicked, and driven by a toxic mix of fear and ideology. They saw every shadow as a partisan, every village as a trap. Their commander, Hauptsturmführer Erich Voss, a man whose dedication to the Nazi cause was absolute, considered this retreat a betrayal. His world was collapsing, and in his desperation he sought to restore order, to reassert power in any way possible. His eyes fell upon the isolated village of Saint-Pierre, a soft target, an opportunity for resupply, and perhaps more importantly to his frayed psychological state, a demonstration of authority. Voss's unit possessed the tools of overwhelming force: MG-42 machine guns, the infamous Spandau, capable of spitting out 200 rounds per minute, standard-issue Mauser Kar 98K rifles, and the chilling, impersonal efficiency of the MP-40 submachine gun. For the 48 civilians of Saint-Pierre, their defense rested on the frail, nearly non-existent resources of a lifetime of peace. The first sign of the approaching Iron Fist was not the sound of marching, but a profound, unnatural silence in the forest. The birds stopped singing. The village elder, Madame Delacroix, the baker's wife, remarked on it. Marcel, working the edges of his meager field, straightened his back, his instincts honed by years of watching the sky for both rain and ravens. He looked toward the North Road, the single muddy track leading to the forest. There, the shadows were too deep, too still. Marcel had seen the German patrols, knew their casual cruelty. But this was different. This silence was the precursor to a roar. He paused, leaning on his shovel, the instrument of his peaceful life. In the quiet instant before the storm broke, Marcel made a choice that would defy every military manual, every statistical probability, and every expectation of a farmer facing 300 soldiers. He would not run. He would not surrender. He would use the land he knew, the stone he built with, and the will he possessed to stand his ground. This moment, the choice of a single man against a desperate retreating army, is the very essence of our narrative. It is the story of how a small patch of earth, a few meters of stone wall and a 6-hour stand redefined the meaning of resistance. Before we delve deeper into the intricate tactical preparations and the first volley of the desperate siege, consider this. In a war defined by the colossal clash of industrialized armies, the true acts of courage often happened in the smallest, most ignored corners of the world. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the secrets of Saint-Pierre and the legendary 6-hour stand. The decision had been made, but the execution was the true test of will. Marcel Dubois was not a soldier. He was an architect of the soil, a builder of walls, and now he had to become a fortress designer. His training was in the weather, the harvest, and the habits of animals, not in the doctrine of defensive warfare. Yet his understanding of his own land, the intimate knowledge of every depression, every sturdy corner of his farmhouse, became his strategic masterpiece. The intelligence Marcel possessed was rudimentary, gathered from a hurried conversation with a terrified young resistance courier. A large German force, estimated at over 300 men, heavily armed, moving south, due to pass Saint-Pierre within the hour. This was the scale of his enemy. One man armed with the tools of peace, facing a company of armed, disciplined and brutalized soldiers. The first, critical task was the evacuation of the villagers. Marcel's calm, authoritative voice cut through the burgeoning panic. He directed the women and children into the old wine cellar, a deep, reinforced stone structure beneath the Delacroix bakery. It was not bulletproof, but it was out of sight, and it offered a measure of psychological security. Their survival depended now on their silence and his ability to distract the enemy. Marcel's own farmhouse, a thick-walled structure of local limestone built by his grandfather, became the centerpiece of his improvised defense. He moved with a speed and focus that belied his age. First, the field of fire. Marcel's backyard faced the forest and the main approach road. He knew the land sloped gently upward for 70 meters before leveling off. This terrain provided a crucial advantage for the attackers, a clear line of sight. Marcel raced to his woodshed and emerged with a heavy, rusted scythe and a saw. In 15 frantic minutes, he cleared the low brush and pruned the small fruit trees near his house, creating a wide, unobstructed kill zone. He used his plow to throw up a small temporary berm of soil 20 meters out, a trivial obstacle for a trained soldier, but one that would momentarily slow an advance and provide a visual tripwire. Second, the arsenal. The inventory of Marcel's war chest was pitifully small, yet used with surgical precision. The rifle, an old French hunting rifle, a single-shot Liebel MO 1886. It was heavy, long, and chambered a powerful $8 x 50 $x round. Marcel possessed only 32 cartridges, carefully hoarded since the occupation. This limited supply dictated his entire tactical doctrine. Every shot must count. The shotgun, a double-barreled hunting shotgun, loaded with birdshot. Useless at range, but devastatingly effective for close-quarters defense. He had 6 shells. The improvised weapons, a collection of ancient gardening tools, pitchforks, spades, and a collection of ceramic bottles. He filled the bottles with a highly flammable mixture of lamp oil and turpentine, stoppering them with cloth. Crude Molotov cocktails, the poor man's incendiary device. Third, the fortifications. The windows of the stone farmhouse were Marcel's main liability. He quickly barricaded them with stacks of dried firewood and heavy furniture, leaving only narrow slits for observation and firing. Crucially, he did not barricade the back door. He reinforced it only enough to buy him a few seconds, knowing it would be a critical escape route. The strategic irony was profound. The German military complex, fueled by the staggering industrial output of Krupp and Messerschmitt, relied on the sheer overwhelming power of steel and explosives. Marcel relied on the simple physics of his environment. He was fighting a war of attrition with finite resources, betting that his deep local knowledge could neutralize the enemy's numerical superiority. He positioned himself on the second floor, a small room that overlooked the main approach. The stone walls were nearly a meter thick, the best available protection against small arms fire. He placed his rifle by the window, his few bottles of oil stacked neatly beside him. Below, the shotgun lay on the ground floor, a grim final resort. As Marcel took his first breath in what felt like an eternity, the sound finally came. It was not the crisp, professional clank of a regular army, but a low, guttural murmur, the sound of 300 men moving silently through the woods. The German company was approaching. Voss, the Hauptsturmführer, had deployed a vanguard of 50 men, armed with automatic weapons, moving in a loose skirmishing line. They expected no resistance. They expected 48 civilians, a quick grab for food and a smooth departure. A German soldier, young and clearly nervous, moved across Marcel's sight line, casually kicking a stone. He was the first to cross the invisible line of engagement. Marcel, his heart pounding a rhythm that felt centuries old, raised the heavy level. He was aiming not at the center mass, but at the soldier's left shoulder, calculating the maximum shock of the large-caliber round. He exhaled slowly, focusing the front post on the target. This was the moment when a farmer stopped being a civilian and became the garrison of a fortress. The complexity of the German assault, the intricate dance between Voss's psychological state and his tactical decisions, and the unbelievable precision of Marcel's initial shots, all of this and more awaits us in the coming chapters. Don't miss a minute of this true story of defiance. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell so you can witness the incredible conclusion. The silence broke, not with the expected thunder of a German machine gun, but with a single, sharp crack that seemed to rip the afternoon air in half. The time was 14:15. Marcel's first shot was the purest expression of his necessity, a perfect strike. The young German soldier, who had been strolling with a dangerous nonchalance, crumpled instantly, the high-velocity $8 x round delivering a massive kinetic shock. The man's rifle clattered onto the dirt road. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The initial 50-man German vanguard, conditioned to expect surrender or panicked flight, froze. They were veterans, trained to locate the source of fire instantly, but this single shot delivered from an unseen position carried an ominous weight. It was too accurate for a desperate partisan, too controlled for a fleeing villager. Hauptsturmführer Voss, observing from a short distance behind the vanguard, registered the loss of the soldier. His initial reaction was annoyance, swiftly followed by a terrible cold rage. "Partisans! 6 men maximum! Clear them out! Use the automatic fire!" He barked into his field radio. Voss's arrogance, his fundamental underestimation of the enemy, was now an active, dangerous element in Marcel's favor. He saw a nuisance, not a threat. The SS troops responded with a terrifying, unified burst of fire. 3 MG-42s were brought to bear on the farmhouse. The air was filled with the sound of the machine guns, the iconic sound of German military might, a ripping, soaring sound, often described by Allied soldiers as a canvas being torn. Rounds impacted the thick limestone of Marcel's house, spitting shards of rock and dust. Marcel was momentarily deafened, pressed against the inner wall, the concussion of the impacts shaking the very foundation of the building. This was the terror factor, the German method. Overwhelm the enemy with a deluge of lead, a sustained rate of fire designed to suppress and psychologically break the defense. He waited, counting the seconds, estimating the reload time for the MG teams. He knew that the moment they stopped firing to reposition or change belts was his only window. He sighted through the smallest slit in his barricade, scanning the perimeter. The Germans were now prone, using the cover of the roadside ditch, their weapons traversing the front of the house. Marcel selected his next target, a non-commissioned officer, NCO, who was trying to coordinate the fire, shouting orders. This was a classic sniper's tactic: remove the leader, sow confusion. The NCO, identifiable by his helmet markings and the volume of his commands, was a more challenging shot, partially obscured by a patch of high grass. Crack, the second shot, another clean hit. The NCO screamed once, a sound instantly swallowed by the returning fire of his confused men. In the span of 2 minutes, Marcel had fired 2 bullets and scored 2 kills, eliminating a scout and a key leader. The psychological impact on the German line was immense. A subtle shift in perception began to take hold. This was not a quick skirmish with disorganized partisans. This was a skilled, entrenched shooter. "Keep your heads down, move around the flanks. He is pinned inside the house," Voss commanded, now forced to reassess. He had committed 50 men to a frontal assault that was bleeding casualties. His resources, the other 250 men, were still uncommitted, but he was reluctant to use them all against a single farmhouse. This was a retreat, not a siege. The SS troops on the flanks began to advance, using the cover of the tall hedgerows that defined the agricultural fields of the region. This was the test Marcel had prepared for. The narrow field of fire he had cleared earlier was now critical. He moved quickly to the third firing slit, repositioning himself to cover the right flank. A squad of 8 men was advancing in a staggered file, relying on the cover of a dense blackberry bush. Marcel fired, deliberately aiming for the center of the formation. Crack! A miss. The bullet went wide, chipping the stone behind the troops. The German response was immediate. A burst from an MP-40 ripped through the wood and plaster of the window frame near Marcel's head. Splinters flew. Marcel was reminded of the sheer terrifying power of his enemy. He was not invisible, he was merely hidden. He reloaded the Lebel, the heavy bolt action a rhythmic mechanical process that focused his mind. He aimed again, this time lower, anticipating their forward movement. Crack! This time a direct hit on the lead soldier, felling him. The remaining 7 men went immediately to ground, confused and pinned. The lead element was unable to advance, and the element of surprise was completely gone. Statistically, Marcel had achieved a 75% accuracy rate with the first 4 rounds of his limited ammunition. The efficiency was staggering. Voss was now receiving reports. 3 men down, Hauptsturmführer. Frontal advance stalled, flanks pinned down by precise fire. The commander, a fanatic but not a fool, felt the cold prickle of reality. This was not a group of civilians. The tactical signature was too professional. His initial analysis had been fatally flawed. He now believed he was facing a heavily armed ambush by a resistance platoon, perhaps even a detachment of American Special Forces. The Iron Fist paused. The roaring sound of the MG-42s tapered off into sporadic bursts. A deadly silence returned, but this silence was different. It was the silence of calculation, of a predator studying its trapped prey. Marcel had successfully forced the enemy to pause, to reorganize, and most importantly, to respect him. This pause gave Marcel a few precious minutes. He crawled quickly to his water pitcher, taking a long, deep drink. His hands were slick with sweat, his heart hammering in his ribs. He had bought time, but at the cost of his anonymity. The game was no longer an ambush, it was a siege, and he was about to face the full weight of 300 desperate men. The clock was ticking against Marcel, but the pause had introduced a critical element into the battle, doubt within the German command structure. Voss, now convinced he was facing a formidable tactical unit, halted the immediate advance. He ordered a full defensive perimeter to be established around the farmhouse, drawing on a significant portion of his 300 men. He would not commit to a costly, full-scale infantry assault without understanding the enemy's size and armament. From his vantage point, Marcel could see the methodical deployment. German soldiers, highly trained despite their current desperate circumstances, were utilizing textbook-perfect cover. They were establishing firing positions behind the stone wall of the adjacent barn and the thick trunks of the oak trees lining the road. Marcel now engaged in a war of nerves. He did not fire, knowing that every single bullet of his remaining 28 was a non-renewable asset. He sat motionless, watching through his narrow slit, allowing the silence to amplify the psychological pressure on the enemy. The German soldiers, expecting a fusillade from a machine gun or a mortar team, were left waiting, listening only to the oppressive summer heat and the pounding of their own adrenaline. The irony of industrial warfare was on full display. The Nazi war machine, designed for overwhelming force, had produced millions of rounds of $7, 92 Extor ammunition, thousands of MG-42s, and hundreds of thousands of meticulously trained infantrymen. Their strategy was volume, the ability to replace losses and the inexhaustible supply chain of a vast, if crumbling, empire. Marcel's strategy was scarcity, the philosophy of not firing. He was fighting a defensive war of precision, conserving the energy and the ammunition of one man against a company. Voss, unwilling to let the silence continue, opted for a probing psychological attack. He ordered a sustained burst of harassing fire from all positions. The goal was simple: pin the enemy down, force them to reveal their positions and remind them of their vulnerability. For 10 minutes the farmhouse was raked by fire. Hundreds of rounds slammed into the stone walls. The windows, already heavily barricaded, exploded inward. The air inside the farmhouse became thick with dust, smoke, and plaster. The sheer noise was a physical assault. Marcel, pressed against the floor, covered his ears. He realized that the Germans were not aiming for a breach. They were aiming for his will. "Hans, did you see movement?" "No, just dust, Lieutenant." The German reports were inconclusive. The lack of return fire frustrated Voss. A genuine military unit would have responded with suppression fire. This silence was alien, unsettling. Voss decided to deploy a crucial asset, the Panzerfaust. This simple yet devastating anti-tank weapon was essentially a single-shot recoilless gun, firing a shaped charge that could penetrate even the thickest armor. Against a stone farmhouse, it was overkill, but Voss wanted to shatter the perceived invulnerability of the structure. "Team 4, launch a Panzerfaust into the center mass of the building. Blow out the rear entrance." Marcel heard the distinct metallic clank of the weapon being armed and the shouted German commands. He knew the impact of this weapon would be catastrophic. The thick stone wall, designed to keep out the weather, would be no match for the explosive power of the Panzerfaust. His defensive position would become a tomb. He knew the weapon's trajectory was relatively flat and that the soldiers launching it would be exposed for a brief moment. He took his 27th bullet, loaded the level, and sighted on the point he estimated the firing team would emerge from behind the barn. The two German soldiers, a gunner and a loader, dashed out from cover. The gunner knelt, readying the weapon against his shoulder. Marcel fired. Crack! The shot was less than a clean kill, but it struck the gunner in the hip, sending him spinning backward in a cry of agony. The shaped charge, armed and ready to fire, slammed into the dirt harmlessly. The effect was instantaneous. The sheer, terrifying efficiency of the defense had stopped a weapon designed to destroy tanks. It was a crippling blow to German morale. Marcel had proven that he could counter their overwhelming firepower with nothing more than precision and timing. This moment forced Voss into a new calculus. He was losing men and failing to advance. His company was tied down, consuming valuable time and ammunition. The strategic objective, rejoin the main column, was being jeopardized by a single, unseen, infuriating defender. Voss issued his new orders. No more frontal assaults. No more waste of heavy weapons. Surround the house, we will hold fire, we will wait him out. He is one man, he must run out of ammunition, water or courage. The siege had entered a new, grim phase. Marcel was now utterly surrounded, his fate sealed by the geometry of the situation. The true test of the farmer's fortress was about to begin. The standoff continued, stretching into the late afternoon. The sun, dipping toward the horizon, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the dust motes in the silence. It was a silence filled with the heavy breathing of 300 men surrounding one. This was the part of the war that military history often neglects, the human element, the raw, unfiltered experience of fear and determination on both sides of the line. From the German perspective, the SS men were growing restless, their morale plummeting. They were trained to be predators, to advance and conquer. This forced passivity, being pinned down by an invisible enemy in a seemingly empty village, was corrosive to their discipline. An SS private, Helmut Becker, hunkered behind the stone wall of the Delacroix bakery, whispered his fears to his lieutenant. "Herr Lieutenant, how many men are in there? He shoots like a trained sniper. It is not possible for a farmer. Maybe the Americans left a demolition squad. Every time we move, he knows." This fear was rooted in the unexpected. The German soldier was conditioned to face armies, not individual acts of perfect defiance. The belief in an unseen, well-armed force made them cautious to the point of paralysis. Every window became a machine gun nest, every flicker of shadow a mortar team. Voss, the Hauptsturmführer, felt the pressure closing in. His primary fear was not the man in the house, but the time he was wasting. He knew the Allied forces were sweeping around his position, and this delay could mean the destruction of his company. His pride was battling his strategic sense. He felt personally insulted by Marcel's resistance. From Marcel's perspective, Marcel, the single garrison of the fortress, was fighting an enemy far more insidious than the SS: fatigue and dehydration. The exertion, the fear, and the lack of water were beginning to take their toll. His mouth was dry, his vision slightly blurred from the dust and the strain of constant focus. He had 8 bullets left. He found solace, however, in the knowledge of the silence from the wine cellar. The villagers were safe, their lives purchased by his efforts. He allowed himself a brief, dark moment of reflection, a silent testimony of the moment. They brought their great guns and their great hate. They stole everything, even the dignity of the defeated. I have 8 bullets left. It is 8 lives for 8 minutes of their time. And in those 8 minutes the world will turn a little more toward morning. This was the internal monologue of a man pushed past the breaking point, where the fear of dying is replaced by the sheer, cold determination not to yield. His focus was total. He was an extension of his weapon, a mechanism of defense. Voss tried one more psychological tactic. He sent a soldier with a megaphone toward the house. The German voice, distorted and echoing, boomed across the dusty clearing. "Resistance is futile. Surrender now. We know you are a partisan squad. Surrender, and the villagers will be spared. Continue this, and we will burn the village to the ground." Marcel did not respond. He knew the promise of surrender was a lie. He had seen the black-hearted work of the SS before. His silence was the ultimate act of defiance. The climax. The miscalculation. Voss, interpreting the silence as a sign of weakening resolve, made his final, most critical error. He decided on a two-pronged, desperate approach. Tactic 1. The incendiary attack. Voss ordered 2 teams to advance under heavy suppression fire, armed with jerrycans of fuel and flares. Their mission: set the farmhouse ablaze, flushing the defender out into the open. Tactic 2. The rear assault. A squad of 12 men, highly motivated fanatics, was ordered to crawl around the perimeter, using the dense scrub and the cover of the small orchard to attack the vulnerable back door of the farmhouse. This was the most complex maneuver of the entire engagement. Marcel anticipated the frontal attack. The flash of a flare igniting was his cue. The German suppression fire was deafening, forcing him back from the window. The roar of the fire would mean the end. This was the moment Marcel deployed his final improvised defense, the farmer's last resort. As the German frontal assault troops raced toward the porch, clutching their fuel cans, Marcel moved with practiced speed. He grabbed the last 3 of his ceramic bottles, his crude Molotov cocktails, and the double-barreled shotgun. He knew that throwing the bottles from the window would expose him to the torrent of machine gun fire. He moved to the front door, a heavy, thick plank of oak. He unlocked the old latch and kicked the door open violently, using the opening arc as a shield, exposing himself for less than a second. The 3 oil-filled bottles sailed out. The leading German soldier, the one carrying the first flare, saw the projectiles too late. The impact was devastating. The thin ceramic shattered against the stone, the oil and turpentine spreading across the dry grass and the uniforms of the 2 lead soldiers. Marcel immediately followed up with the most critical shot of his defense. He fired 1 barrel of the shotgun. The blast, loaded with birdshot, created a shower of sparks that instantly ignited the highly flammable mixture. The time was 1835. A literal fireball erupted in the clearing. The screams of the 2 burning German soldiers were horrific, echoing across the silent battlefield. The shock, the sudden burst of primitive, unexpected fire, caused the entire frontal assault to break and scatter. The SS troops, trained to face the impersonal violence of bullets, were psychologically devastated by the sight and sound of their comrades burning. This was Marcel's moment of tactical ascendancy. He slammed the door shut, bolted it, and ran to the back of the house, the shotgun in his hand. The rear assault team, 12 SS men, was at that very moment breaking through the small kitchen garden. They expected a quick breach, finding the back door weakly defended by the pinned enemy. Marcel, knowing his only escape route was about to be compromised, was already waiting. He took his position beside the heavy back door. The SS men began to smash the door in with their rifle butts, splintering the old wood. As the door buckled inward, Marcel fired the remaining barrel of the shotgun at point-blank range through the splintered wood. The spread of the pellets, effective even through the thin barrier, caught the leading 3 men, including the squad's NCO, in a terrifying close-quarters blast. The squad recoiled in horror. Their leader was down. The breach had been met not with an empty room, but with a wall of lead. The remaining 9 men, already on edge from the fire in the front and the exhaustion of the crawl, hesitated. Marcel's voice, raw and strained, but carrying the full weight of his conviction, boomed through the shattered doorway in rapid, broken French. "This house is the cemetery of your company. Go back, run, tell your commander that the fields of France will bury you all." The effect was instantaneous. The unexpected ferocity, the close-quarters terror and the strange, triumphant shouting of the lone defender shattered the cohesion of the rear assault. They abandoned the attack, retreating rapidly back toward the orchard. The collapse of order. Hauptsturmführer Voss, watching the frontal assault disintegrate in a screaming inferno and receiving reports of the disastrous failure of the rear flank, felt his control slip away. His company was no longer a cohesive military unit. It was 300 frightened, exhausted men. He looked at his watch. They had been pinned down by one man for over 6 hours. The time lost was strategically fatal. Allied reconnaissance was now moving into the sector. He had a choice: continue the siege and lose his entire command, or cut his losses and attempt a desperate, hurried retreat. The sight of the flames from the burning soldiers and the shouts of the retreating men made the choice for him. Voss gave the order: "Withdraw, immediate withdrawal, abandon all equipment that slows your pace, southeast vector, move, move." The German retreat was not a professional extraction. It was a panicked flight. Soldiers, throwing down their cumbersome MG-42s and spare ammunition belts, scrambled back into the dark shelter of the whispering forest, their objective now survival, not vengeance. Marcel, his ears ringing, watched through the smoke-filled window. He saw the retreat, the chaotic, panicked rush of 300 defeated men. He picked up his Liebel, loaded his sixth-to-last bullet, and fired one final symbolic shot at the retreating commander's position, a punctuation mark on the end of the siege. He did not reload. He lowered the rifle and leaned his head against the dusty stone, the monumental weight of the 6-hour stand finally crashing down on him. The time was 2020. The sun had fully set, and the first star was visible in the clearing sky. The sound of the retreating German company faded into the silence of the forest, replaced by the crackling of the dying fire near Marcel's porch. Marcel Dubois, the farmer, the builder of the fortress, stood in the dust and the wreckage of his home. He had expended 27 rounds of $8 Extel ammunition, all 6 shotgun shells, and all the lamp oil he possessed. In doing so, he had faced down 300 professional soldiers and secured the survival of 48 civilians. He walked slowly to the stone wine cellar beneath the bakery. He unbarred the heavy wooden hatch and looked down into the gloom. "The Germans are gone," he said simply, his voice hoarse. The sound of his voice was met with a rush of weeping, quiet, relieved sobbing. The villagers emerged, blinking in the twilight, looking not at the retreating horizon, but at the single dusty figure of their savior. Madame Delacroix, the baker's wife, walked up to him and, without a word, simply held his hand. The aftermath and the legacy. The following morning, American reconnaissance troops, a small platoon of the 79th Infantry Division, entered Saint-Pierre. They were expecting to find a scene of massacre or the aftermath of a major battle. What they found was a single shattered farmhouse surrounded by evidence of a devastating engagement. 3 German corpses near the porch, 1 badly burned. The bodies of a German NCO and a private farther out, bearing the hallmarks of precise rifle fire. 2 abandoned functional MG-42 machine guns and 3 discarded Panzerfaust tubes. An estimated 7 additional trails of dragged bodies leading back into the forest, indicating casualties carried away during the retreat. The final tally. Marcel's 6-hour stand inflicted an estimated 5 confirmed kills, 2 seriously wounded, and a total of over 20 casualties, killed and wounded, on the German company, completely derailing their strategic objective. When the bewildered American commander, Lieutenant Dale Harris, questioned Marcel about the battle, he was incredulous. "How many men did you have in the house, sir? A platoon of resistance?" Marcel simply replied, "Only the house, Lieutenant. The house and the earth." The irony of the conflict. Marcel's stand was a triumph of the individual over the industrial scale of war. The Nazi war machine was ultimately defeated not only by the staggering production of Allied factories, the thousands of Sherman tanks and Mustang fighters, but by the millions of small, defiant and wholly individual acts of refusal. The soldier who carried the MG-42 believed in the power of the machine gun. Marcel believed in the power of his earth and his will. Marcel's belief proved stronger. The 300 men of Voss's company, battered and scattered, were eventually intercepted by Allied units farther south. Voss himself was captured days later, still consumed by the shame of his failure. In his interrogation report, He described the Battle of Saint-Pierre not as a skirmish, but as a fanatical defensive position manned by a company-sized unit of highly trained American-backed insurgents. The narrative of the one-man garrison was simply too incredible for his military mind to accept. He died without ever knowing he had been outfought by a single farmer with 32 bullets. Marcel Dubois never considered himself a hero or a soldier. He returned to his field, repaired his walls and picked up his shovel. The scars on the stone of his farmhouse and the long, silent stares he sometimes gave the forest were the only monuments to his 6-hour stand. He had done what was necessary. The story of the farmer's fortress, Saint-Pierre, is the ultimate illustration of how technology, strategy, and power can be rendered meaningless by the indomitable will of one person defending his home. It is the story of the moment when a man's pride in his field became more durable than a company of steel and fanaticism. We encourage you to share this story of Marcel Dubois and the 6-hour stand. If you want to dive deeper into the tactics and technology that defined World War II's most crucial moments, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter of history's most gripping sagas.